Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Let's Talk with me, Joe Emilio. And tonight I have a very special guest who I'm so excited to be having a discussion with. Sichle, also known as Big Daddy Liberty. Some of you may have seen some of the videos that I've edited of his vlogs. He's very passionate about what's going on in South Africa at the moment, and that's what we're basically going to talk about tonight. Sichle, say hi to everyone.
Hello, and Molo Sambanani, hello, how's it? Shalom, as I always say on my show. I'm super happy to be with you, Joe. Shout out to you and your audience. Thanks for having me, man.
Oh, it's a pleasure, man. Thank you so much again for willing to be on here. So first, we're going to start off easy. I'm just going to ask you, how are you doing? How was your day? And also let the audience know, for those who may not know who you are, just explain a bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah. Again, thank you very much. Guys, my name is Big Daddy Liberty, your favorite fat boy, and I'd like to call myself the street fighter of classically liberal ideas in South Africa. I'm a libertarian in nature. Americans would consider me conservative also to an extent. And what I do essentially is I can segment it into two broad categories. Both of which are geared towards shaping a sort of South Africa I want to see. Because I think anybody who's watching this, anybody who may be South African or aware of South Africa will know exactly what we're going through and how the tyranny of evil men in government has essentially created a divided society, one where because we're South African, race is used as the metric, one where we're divided along those racial lines. And ever increasingly, we've become a society of economic and political insiders, a small, crooked elite of those insiders, if you will, in a sea of the rest of South Africa, which is, the economic and political outsiders who eke an existence out in what should be the greatest country in the world, but we aren't. What should be the greatest society in the world, but we aren't. Why? Because everybody's stealing, everybody's dealing and wheeling, and we're becoming the open sewer of the world, if anything else. So what do? I'm that guy who has devoted his life, given up his professional life, given up his social life at times, in order to fight for South Africans, in order to fight for that society that I talk about as wanting. And what is that society, very briefly? It's a society which is founded on liberty, freedoms, as being the central political value of every South African, the very thing we've never really enjoyed as South Africans, if you want to go back to the days of colonialism, right through apartheid, and even in today's South Africa. We've never been a free, prosperous, non-racial and property-owning society. We've always been one iteration of racial nationalism and socialism to the next. So what do? As I always say, as I always try and get to, I basically fight the battle of ideas. As I said, I've devoted my life in the here and now to traversing this country, to spread the ideas of a free, prosperous, and property-owning society. The idea that every South African has the right to life, liberty, and property. And to do so with the understanding that there's far more things, that bind us as a people than that do divide us. And I talk a lot about this. And if you do know my channel, you hear me talk about this a lot. The idea of the values that I fight for, the idea of, faith, flag, and the family, what's now becoming the triple F, as people call it. Let me repeat that. It's I fight for faith. The idea that South Africans are a God-fearing nation. We are 97% Christian, and it's not so much the religion itself that I care about, but more the values we derive from our different religions, whether you're Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, Jewish, or even Muslim. We all derive values that really are the very glue that unify us as South Africans. Being kind to a neighbor, etc., etc. I can go down the line in that. So I fight for that South African who recognizes there's more to us in terms of our values that binds us than divides us. The second F, if you will, is the idea of the flag. I love my country but I hate my government. That is an important distinction to make, especially when you look at what exactly that government does. The evil nature of that government, the divisive nature of that government. So I definitely love this country. And I will fight for every single South African to enjoy living in a free, prosperous, and property-owning, non-racial society. And the last value, really, is the most important. It's the idea of families. As a liberal, Joe, I talk about the individual this, the individual that. But really, we're a family society. And in us being a family society, you will find that individuals will do anything and everything for the benefit of family. People will literally bend over backwards, work themselves to the bone, knowing that whatever they do is for the benefit of those they love. And this is the very thing that in this country politicians hate. They hate the idea that we owe a fealty more to our families and our loved ones and not to them as political overlords. Because again, we have a gaggle of politicians in this country who expect us to praise and worship them over and above our faith, over and above our love of country, and over and above our love and care for our families. So I stand dialectically opposed to that government. I stand dialectically opposed to those sort of politicians who happen, unfortunately, to be mostly on the left. And I do have my criticism, by the way, of those politicians who are on the right, because they also can take populist stances that are against, at times, faith, flag, and the family, and more importantly, our liberty. So that's who Big Daddy Liberty is. He is a champion of liberty, a fighter for these free ideals, these classically liberal ideals that will build the sort of South African that I think we want. You build a nation, it's not handed to you.
Yes, I agree with everything you've just said. Absolutely everything, and I think you would be pleasantly surprised at how many people do agree with you and may not exactly voice it. I've been pleasantly surprised to see the videos that I've been putting out there. There's a lot of people, even though I thought they had a different view, they came out and they're like, "Oh, I agree with this guy. This is awesome. Finally, someone talking and speaking out and stuff like that."
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you something that I really don't mean to offend you. That's the last thing I want to do. But there was something.
Dude, last person you'll ever offend is me.
All right.
Hit it, man. Go ahead.
There was something that was brought to my attention in a discussion with a friend, and someone said that, do you think he might be riding on the wave of anger? What he meant by that was, have you maybe found a niche now in the market to grow your brand, and now you're putting out all these angry videos? Now, before you answer, let me say what I told him. I said, look,
Yeah.
I would say that, but anybody who watches those videos, I mean, the one you got emotional, dude, you almost cried. Like it's you can feel the passion, and it's very hard to fake that. Very hard.
Yeah.
But that's my opinion. What do you say to people who might think that?
Look, I say this a lot on my show. First and foremost, I am a South African. I live in the very country that I'm talking about. I have skin in the game, as Ramon Kabanek often talks about. Whatever happens to this country happens to me, happens to my family, the very people that I love. So it begs the question, why wouldn't I be angry? I mean, for example, that person who says that, nothing against them, I think it's a valid question. That person who says that forgets that I'm part and parcel of that angry society. I'm part and parcel of that very society that feels deeply aggrieved, rightly so, by the way, at the way in which they're being essentially abused and manhandled by a state that is yoked in these toxic ideas, these leftist ideals, which are a dystopia in nature. And the use then to enforce these ideas of a security branch, a security force in this country that's being turned against us as citizens. Why wouldn't I be angry? Why wouldn't I be angry? Why wouldn't I be angry when I see images? I mean, here's the bottom line, Joe. Take a drive down Main Street, South Africa, wherever you are. Take a drive down Main Street in South Africa. Look to your left, look to your right, and tell me what you see. Do you see an image of happy people who are enjoying the fruits of living in a free, non-racial, prosperous, and property-owning society? I think the short answer is no. So what would then lead me to be someone who's happy at that state of affairs? Unless, of course, there's this implicit assumption that I ought to ignore what happens around me. And unfortunately, that's what South Africans have been told to do. We've been conditioned to ignore the plight of people around us because you're okay. Maybe in your little hooky, you're okay, right? You're basically relegated to going, please, oh, please, Mr. Politician, please, whatever you do, start with the other people and before you get to me. If you do ever get to me, oh, please, Mr. Politician, I will bend the knee to you, and you and your great wisdom, you can tell me and guide me and direct me into the sort of person you want me to be. I can't accept that.
Yes.
I can't accept that. I cannot be a conscious person who believes in freedom for all South Africans. The very thing, by the way, that a lot of people sacrifice their lives and their youth and their very being to try to assist, my generation to attain. It'll be a disservice that I cannot compare to anything in history for me to suddenly then become the person who goes, I'm fine, I'm in the middle class, I'm doing okay. Let me just, be the kind of person who's aloof and doesn't care about the rest of my society. Let me not be emotionally invested in my country. The very piece of soil that I walk on, that I interact with, that I create a life on, that I will be buried in, the very piece of soil that I'll be buried in. Somehow, no, I need to be aloof to that, and that somehow this is maybe performance art or something like that. Hey, man, this is real life.
Yeah.
This is real life. When you see me out in the streets, and I often say this on my show, if you ever see my bakkie, if you ever see me anywhere, 9 times out of 10, it will be in the very sort of communities that I've argued need to be given sorry, I got trapped by my own sentence construction there. Let me rephrase that. 9 times out of 10, you will see me in the very communities that we've forgotten and we've relegated to being, oh, Gambe, there's these people we call poor people. Leave them to the politicians. You will find me in those communities because I've always made the argument that we need to start respecting fellow South Africans from all walks, by the way. And it's not a racial point. It's more a point along the different echelons we have of income in this country, where we've been desensitized from seeing the plight of mostly poor South Africans. Yes, who happen in the majority to be black, but we've literally been desensitized from seeing their plight. And you then have people who say, oh yeah, of course, people are just angry at the moment, because implicitly in that also is the suggestion that everything's going to be fine, and that this is just a temporary blip in time.
Yeah.
It's not, guys. You've got to wake up to what's happening around you, and that's my role. I think that's what I've devoted my life to waking South Africans up, to red pilling them, if I can use that expression, to say you're not living in a normal society. Nothing of what's happening around you is normal.
Yeah.
You want to live in a society, as a recap, that is actually free, that is actually non-racial, that is actually prosperous, and that is property owning for people who've been denied those fundamental rights encapsulated in that sentence. People who've been denied that. You want to be the very person who advocates for them and who builds a coalition of South Africans who stop ignoring each other and actually see each other as South Africans, and we're all in this together. Yeah. So that's what I do, man. That's what I do.
I hear you, buddy. And again, another passionate, well said rebuttal to that question. I just have to acknowledge very quickly our comment section or live chat. I see so many people saying, Ronaldo says hi, Big Daddy. He's saying hi
shout out to Ronaldo.
Yeah, he was kind enough to let me tell people on his live stream tonight, because he had one just before we went on, that you will be on my show. So he's very kind. So shout out to Ronaldo. Thank you so much for letting me advertise a bit on your channel. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. Really appreciate it. If I can just take this moment to tell you guys that I'm a local comedian and I interview comedians, and I also interview guys like Big Daddy Liberty now on the show. So I'll be doing a lot of content. Please consider subscribing. And this is just a chat with Big Daddy Liberty to get to know him a little bit better, what he does, and hopefully also talk about some interesting things happening now in South Africa. I've already seen some people commenting about, let me see here very quickly, I'll find it. But in the meantime, guys, don't be afraid to ask questions at any time. Well, if we can get to it, we will.
Absolutely.
Speaking about what you said, how you go on the streets and you get involved with people, you look at people, you ask people questions, I have to commend you. And I have to encourage people to go to your channel, which I will leave a link in the description a bit later after the show, because people must go to your channel and go back in the videos
Yes.
that Big Daddy has uploaded, because I've watched them. I've seen the one where you went to the ANC manifesto, the EFF manifesto,
Yes.
and the DA manifesto. I've even watched the
That's right.
one where you talked. I don't know where you were. I think you were in a class or something, and you gave a bit of a lecture.
Yes, I'm at the University of Stellenbosch.
Oh,
I
okay,
do
okay.
get invited a lot by academics
Mm.
to come talk to various classes on these ideas because sadly they're not taught in universities.
Uh-huh.
Universities these days are deeply yoked in the ideas of, the sort of cultural Marxism, post-modernism, excuse me, post-modernity rather, and identity politics. It's very much yoked on the left. And they don't get exposed to actual classically liberal ideas, libertarian, if you will, ideas that advocate a different vision for how we can organize society. So I do get invited quite a bit to universities, and that's actually very good talk that I did in that one, because I also translate my ideas into real world solutions. Because a lot of people sort of go, oh, what does a classically liberal society look like? Is it one where everybody's for themselves? Because that's the usual trope that's thrown at libertarians and classical liberals and conservatives. That, oh, you just want to be all in it for yourselves. You won't care about the next man. That's not true. And in that particular video, I break it down
Yes.
in detail. And by the way, that same video and that same talk, to an extent, is the talk that I also do when I'm in an informal settlement,
Yes.
talking to a small group of mamas in a stokvel. I don't discriminate on the ideas. I don't pander to one group and say a different thing to another group. The ideas are consistent because I'm arguing that it is the ideas. It is this battle of ideas, if you will, that will win in terms of swaying where our society goes. Do we go down the line of a Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Cuba-esque type society where the politicians are everything to the people who live there, and your very existence depends on said politicians, and there's very little in the way of individual freedoms, very little in the way of family freedom? Or do we go down the line of becoming a society much more akin to being a United States? Again, I can give multiple examples of what you can do, but essentially a free, prosperous, non-racial, and property-owning society. That's the fork at the road that we're at. And when I talk a lot, Joe, as a final thought, as I talk a lot about the battle of ideas, which is what I'm waging, which is what I'm in, it's exactly that. The battle of ideas theory basically posits that it is a society at the point of crisis. At a society at the point of crisis, he who injects the most ideas into that society, let me rephrase, he who injects the greatest volume of ideas in that society wins in terms of swaying that society in whichever way direction it needs to go. And right now, I'm in that fight, and I'm in the ring, if you will, hypothetically, with the sort of broad spectrum of political leftism that we have in this country, whether it's the ANC, elements of the DA even, believe it or not, and even the EFF. I'm in the ring with those people. I go toe to toe, if you will, with those people in terms of doing the groundwork of fighting the battle of ideas. So as I circle back very quickly, that's what I mean when I say to people that essentially 70% of what I do is the groundwork of being in communities, whether it's an informal settlement, a rural part of the country, a township, or even leafy suburbia, talking to various South Africans and selling these ideas to them, using, of course, the values that I spoke about of faith, flag, and the family as the glue that brings us all together. So that's, if I can give it another nutshell, exactly what I do.
Yes. And I gotta say, the videos that I've watched, the ANC manifesto, the DA manifesto, the EFF manifesto, interesting conversations with local people that are on the ground that actually we can see are being told lies in the simple questions that you ask them. And I encourage people to go and watch. It's fascinating, and it shows what you do and how you handle these people. You give them interesting questions and rebuttals, and it's fascinating to see them reply, and also you prove your point as well. So. Again, go check out that. Go check out the other lecture that you have. I also enjoyed, which I thought was very interesting as well, and I encourage this one as another one for people to put on their playlist. The debate you had, capitalism versus communism. That was fascinating.
That was lovely. Oh, that was absolutely fantastic. That's the one that had a good buddy of mine, Piake Kamini from the Free Market Foundation. Shout out to you, Piake, if you're watching. And Gabriel Krauser from the Institute of Race Relations. And of course, I'll forget his name now, and forgive me, I've totally forgotten his name, who represented essentially the communist argument. And again, the idea is you want to create a safe space for dangerous ideas.
Yes.
And you want to create a safe space for dangerous ideas to be debated amongst each other. I've always said this, I don't shut the show down. My show isn't just a one-way street to an extent. It's iterative, I allow people to literally elucidate their ideas, share their vision of things, and we have a civil conversation about these things. That's why, for instance, when you saw me at the EFF rally, great efforts to allow people to share their vision of things. And you often found, as what I found, at least in that case, that a lot of the support base of some of these political parties don't actually identify with the ideology of their political overlords. There's a big disjuncture between what the political elites in this country espouse on a day-to-day basis and what actually ordinary, run-of-the-mill, salt-of-the-earth South Africans want. And there's a commonality amongst the South Africans, and it has very little to do with leftist ideology. And to be honest, if I'm to be brutally honest, it has also little to do with a classically liberal ideology, but where they meet, that is where their opinion and my ideology meets, is in the values in particular that I argue for, and how I put it to people that the values and the ideas are actually quite sensible. And most South Africans, as a final thought show, are actually quite sensible people. I mean, they understand, pie in the sky ideas. They're not stupid. They know you cannot build a free, prosperous and property owning society by taking from one group to give to the other. There's no growth in that. Yeah. You can only redistribute so much. And you see this a lot in terms of my street engagements. I see this a lot in people who are parents. There's something about people when they become parents and when they have families that makes them understand political ideology. And really, to be specific, it helps them sift through bullshit political ideology versus reality. And that's why I use Shakespeare a lot, funny enough, in my analysis of politics in this country, where every single work by Shakespeare, you can always break it down into two central themes. One is the notion of appearances versus reality, and two, the idea of can you avoid the tragedy? Can you avoid the tragedy? Appearance versus reality is super important. For example, if you look at Macbeth, I think it's Act 3 or Act 4, where Lady Macbeth is talking to Macbeth and basically says, hey, dog, you need to become, in your dealings, you need to become like the serpent beneath the flower, quote. The idea being that, to people around you, you are the flower. You're the appearance of a flower. But the reality is you're the serpent waiting to strike. And of course, the idea of, in the grand scheme of that decision making, in the grand scheme of all of that, can you avoid the tragedy? So again, in my analysis, I often frame a lot of my vlogs, I often frame a lot of the show through that analysis so that people can begin to understand their current affairs in a more deep and meaningful way.
Yeah.
Food for thought.
And I love your renditions. I love your sense of humor as well. If anyone's seen the videos, I have to admit, my wife and I loved it when you said you guys are clapping for this like seals at SeaWorld. Spot on. Spot on.
Well, it really is. Like it's, and that's the thing. Also, funny enough that you mentioned this. I have a great respect for those who work in the realm of free speech and in particular humor. I have a great respect for people like you, Joe, if I'm to bring it up for a moment, who actually work in this realm and ply their art in this trade, because I can tell you now, humor is the one thing that keeps South Africans sane. Yeah. If you look at the amount of trauma, the average South African, black, white, Indian, colored, the amount of trauma we go through as a society, I can assure you, if it weren't for our ability to smile, and to crack a joke every now and again, to break the ice between us that is often created by these very politicians, we would have become a very angry and bitter society a long time ago. But that's not in the nature of South Africans, as I always say. South Africans want to live in a peaceful, cooperative, and free society. I mean, I can go back into history to prove my point. A lot of the violence, for example, that we saw in the lead up to the first election, the first democratic election in this country, South Africans themselves were the ones who said, we're sick of this. We don't want this. But guess who are stoking that violence? The very sort of political elite that we call our politicians, we call our leaders to this day. There's a very interesting book that I'd recommend to your viewers to read by Dr. Anthea Jeffrey from the Institute of Race Relations. It's called The People's War. That book details meticulously how the violence we saw in that period, in the run-up to the elections, the political violence in particular, was actually stoked by the ANC, stoked by the politicians who we today call honorable in the House, especially as a tool by the ANC to try and defeat its black opponents or black formations, essentially. The consciousness movement, which was bigger than the ANC, which had been in exile, and of course the other being the Inkatha Freedom Party, riding on the wave of Zulu nationalism. The ANC, upon unbanning, realized that they actually weren't the shit anymore, so to speak, and that they were dealing with these other formations, these other groupings that had a much larger black support base than they did, and they literally embarked on a campaign of terror and essentially stoking violence and discord in a society, leading to a lot of states of emergencies, leading to a lot of the political violence that we saw, in order to essentially weaken the position of other, and to delegitimize, rather, their black opponents. And it worked, unfortunately. So again, I know I took a bit of a side route there to get back to the idea of humor, but it was actually South Africans, ordinary South Africans, maybe seeing this and growing wary of it, who literally said, no, this is not in the character of who we are as people, regardless of the racial divisions that we've been put through as a people under apartheid, under colonialism. By nature, we are a God-fearing, law-abiding, by and large, unless, of course, the traffic light is turning amber and you want to beat it. Suddenly that law is out the window. We're a God-fearing, law-abiding, and really a family-oriented society. And those values came through, even in the darkest of periods of our time, against, if you will, the very will of the politicians who then came to lead us in this country. So it's that sentiment that I'm working on. It's that South Africa that I'm trying to tap into, to basically give them the ideas. If we already agree on the values, then let me give you the ideas that build the society, that allow us to inculcate these values, to grow our economy, to grow our society, to protect and preserve our families, and essentially allow us, this generation, you and my generation, Joe, to bequeath it to our children, and that it endures for the time ahead. That's my mission.
Yeah. I made a video, and I encourage everyone to go and watch it. It should be the latest upload I've done, not live, one that I uploaded. It's called I Am the We, and it is a letter to my fellow South Africans, where it's just words on the screen, and I'm reading a letter to my fellow South Africans. And you will see that I agree with everything that Sihle has said today, the family views and all that stuff. Which brings me also to this comment here that I have from Jean, I think it's Jean, Dion Locke, who asks a question, and I think this is going to start an interesting conversation with us. Can we create a society where elements of capitalism and communism can coexist? Now, my opinion is, some argue that I think it's Sweden or Norway or one of those have found a balance.
It's a common argument made.
Yes, have found a bit of a balance. But I heard someone say, and I can't remember if it was you or someone else, who said the culture there is what helps it make it work. Now,
that's right. The values in particular.
Yes. So, what is your? How would you answer that question now?
Yeah, it's important to just quickly burst the myth that somehow Scandinavian countries are socialist or communist in nature, or the new buzzword now, very prevalent in America, and it's being imported here in South Africa, is that they are democratically socialist. No such thing exists. What the Scandinavian countries are incredibly homogenous in terms of the society, and because of that, you have a society where 95% plus of the people there share the same value, have the same culture, and essentially are a much more, if I can use the word, cohesive society. And based on that, the trust levels in that society are far higher than, let's say, a much more diverse, multicultural society like South Africa. And again, I don't say this is an indictment on one or the other. It's just a description of the kind of a world that it is. And in this kind of a world that it is, societies like the Scandinavian ones can have a system where they can have rather not a socialist society, but a deeply capitalist society, deeply capitalist. I mean, if you look at where they rank on the World Economic Freedom Index, which is done by, I think, is it the Atlas Group or the Cato Institute, one of those two, I stand corrected, which ranks countries on the levels of economic freedom around the world, the Scandinavian countries rank very highly in those parts of the world. And none of their policies, which are so-called socialist, feature at all, because they don't exist. For instance, some of these countries, in fact, nearly all of these countries don't have a minimum wage. Minimum wages, or rather wages, are determined in a contractual basis between the individual or those concerned and their employer. That's when they come to agreements, which is a rational way of doing things, as opposed to the state deciding wages in a society. Again, the central notion of socialism and communism is the idea that the state, or a collective of individuals, what Marx called the vanguard of the proletariat, if I go into Das Kapital, where he describes that once the revolution happens and the working class, i.e. the proletariat, take over, he then argued that in that new society, the socialist society, from the proletariat must rise an elite. He doesn't use the word elite, but he calls them the vanguard of the proletariat. They're basically a grouping of individuals who then lead this new socialist society, who then decide the winners and losers in society. Now, we now know, thanks in part to the 20th century, that this theory and its tenets, wherever they've been tried, simply don't work. They're actually trash. So what you now have are the adherents of this ideology, namely the adherence to socialism, the adherence to communism, looking for the next best thing. Because of the failure of their project in the 20th century, because of the 100 million people who have literally been murdered by various communist and socialist regimes around the world, and the bloody trail that is left, they try and disassociate themselves from that, and basically now suggest that a welfare society which, by the way, feeds off of a free market capitalist economy, i.e. Scandinavian countries, is socialism. It's not. It simply isn't. Why? Because the governments in those parts of the world do not control the means of production. In other words, they do not control the economy, both in terms of ownership and secondly in terms of controlling what can and can't be done. They don't do that. They allow the markets to create the wealth, and from that wealth, those governments are a beneficiary insofar as they tax quite highly, and from those taxes, they then disperse in the form of welfare. And even then, if I had 10 hours, I would go into the details by each country in detail as to how they do this. But broadly speaking, even then, a lot of those welfare programs are ever increasingly being rolled back and in favor of market alternatives. For example, Sweden now has an education voucher. I speak a lot about this in that particular video. For example, where I lectured at the University of Stellenbosch. Again, I can go down the line in terms of describing what these societies do, but they definitely lean on the side of a market economy. They lean on the side of liberty, and it's rather their homogeneity. Wow, I nearly struggled to say that. And basically the fact that they are 90+% essentially homogenous and share cultural values that sees them have that great level of a welfare type society, but really even that is being rolled back. So to come back to the actual question, can South Africa be a society where we somehow balance a capitalist and really a free market society with a communist one? No, of course not. Because in both of those instances, you have to answer the question of where does the power lie? Does the power lie in a centralized authority of the vanguard of the proletariat, who take the form, inevitably, of course, of being government officials and those linked to government officials? Because remember, if you concentrate power into the hands of the political elites in this country, you will have a situation where to make it in that society, you have to be as close as possible to the political echelons. You have to be close as possible to having politicians as friends, because that's how you make it in that society. Politicians are the ones who then get to dispense all the goodies by choosing winners and losers. That's a communist, socialist, state control, or even statist type society, which South Africa is, by the way. And what I'm advocating for is the converse, which is actually a more market-orientated society, a more family and individual-orientated society. Specifically, the power and the resources are in the hands of individuals and families in a market economy. And that the only role of the state should be, number one, well, actually, there's three roles, therefore, of the state in such a society, and I'll be brief in this one, because this in and of itself is another lecture. There's three roles of the state in such a society. Just give me a moment. I'm parched.
Go ahead.
And no, I will not say cheers like the politicians do in Parliament every time they take a swig of water.
But
that's the most annoying shit ever.
Is it alcohol,
cheers.
though?
Like, no, motherfucker, get back to your speech. Want to hear what's going on. Anyway,
cheers.
So the three roles of the state. The three roles of the state is, number one, is to protect us from foreign aggression. It's the idea that you do want, at a federal level, at a national level, if you will, a defense force, maybe a presidency, and a bit of a diplomatic corps. Absolutely. Nothing wrong with that. So that would be my ideal society. Number two, in terms of the role of the state, is to adjudicate our disputes. I mean, if you live in a country of 55 million people, 11 languages, multiple cultures, multiple religions, of course a bit of conflict will arise in a society like that. Of course there'll be disagreements. Of course there'll be even downright conflict. And what you want, therefore, is to have a body that can adjudicate our disputes based on our separate contractual agreements. So, for instance, if you and I, Joe, had a contract that every Wednesday would host a show at a certain time, and we stipulated in the contract, which is how a functional free society works. People enter into contracts with each other, and there's no third party controlling that, i.e. the state. If one of us flouts or breaks those rules, then we should be able to have recourse to go to the state by way of, a jury of our peers, or maybe a judiciary system that can adjudicate our disputes in that regard. So absolutely, we do need that. And of course, the third area is almost linked to the second. In a society where I talk a lot about a free society being one founded on the idea of preserving life, liberty, and property rights, you can have internal threats to that, specifically criminals. Criminals who threaten life and property. And obviously a role, I believe, legitimate role of the state is for it to protect our life, liberty, and property rights. So by having a police force, for example, by having a criminal justice system, as I went into detail on. So those are the three legitimate roles of the state for me. Anything and everything else outside of that, the state has no role being involved in. And I obviously detail, as I said, I do go into a lot of detail. Please watch the videos, especially the one that Joe mentioned where I lecture at Stellenbosch University, because then I explain, for example, all the other things that people, when they hear me saying this, often go, but what about education? What about safety and security? What about healthcare? I go into great detail there as to how you can actually form a free society that caters and provides all those things without the state necessarily controlling those things.
Yeah. Please go watch it. It's a fascinating lecture. Okay, so Ronaldo, I don't know what's happening with Ronaldo. He's watching, but people are saying that they're not seeing his comments. He's been shadow banned. I don't know how to fix that. I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix that. But he has a question. Who would Sihle love to debate if he could debate anyone?
Oh, that's a good question. Nobody, really. I mean, insofar as I don't have a name that comes to mind. Because again, when you listen to one left, you've heard them all. There's a lack of intellectual diversity in our politics. And I've always made mention of this. I mean, I could debate a trendy lefty douchebag like Floyd Shivambu, and I would be debating, it would be like debating a trendy lefty douchebag like
Jamil.
Mzwanele Masina, the ANC mayor. They're cut from the same cloth. That's why for me, I even on my show, I don't really dwell on the idea of, let me debate someone, for the likes and the clicks, and let me what's the expression used? Let me own them. Let me own them. Like I couldn't care less about that. What I care about is there are people in this country who live in a South Africa where they've never been exposed to any other idea pool other than the broad spectrum of leftism in this country, whether it's center-left with the statism, which is what we basically are as a country, sort of left, if you will, which is the ANC in terms of its doctrine, its founding doctrine of the National Democratic Revolution, a communist socialist doctrine, and the far left, of course, who have always existed in this country and who have now been collated under the brand called the EFF. So that's the sort of spectrum that South Africans have always been exposed to. We've never really had something on the other side of the spectrum, which advocates for a more liberty-orientated South Africa rather, which is ironic, because if you actually talk to South Africans on the streets, you'll quickly find that South Africans themselves are actually quite conservative. They're conservative people. They hold very conservative ideals. But again, the values and the ideals they hold aren't matched by the politics in the country. And what it therefore is a case of, well, we kind of have to vote for what's in front of us, so let me mark my X in that. And even in that scenario, you're finding the data is showing that more and more South Africans are choosing not to engage in formal party politics to the point where there's now essentially 12 going on 13 million South Africans in this country who are eligible to vote but don't vote. Now, let me put that number into context. If I'm saying there's 12 million eligible to vote, South Africans but don't vote, compare that to the number of voters the ANC got in the last election, which is 10 million voters, that tells you a story. If those 12 million voters, for whatever reason, decided on any given election, hey, how about I go out and vote? It'll be tickets for the ANC.
Yeah, I was actually discussing that last night with a friend of mine, Werner Weber. We were talking about the news in the week, and I mentioned those statistics, and I'm so happy you brought them up now. I just wanted to ask you, where do you get these? I'm not questioning, I really am curious. Where do you get these statistics from? Because some people have asked me, where do you get this number from? And I'm like, well, I got it from Big Daddy Liberty or Ronaldo or whoever.
Yeah, sure. It's quite simple. If you look at the voters' roll of the Independent Electoral Commission, it counts the number of people who are eligible to vote, and even in cases who are registered to vote, and you see the numbers there. And of course, if you then aggregate those numbers against the numbers of people who have voted that we see, for example, as the vote tally is developed, you get to see the reality of what the situation really is in this country, where you compare the number of people who have voted versus those who clearly are registered but don't vote.
I see. All right. Very simple then. So we have Jean Dion Locke. I hope I'm saying that right. Sichle, please debate Jamil.
Wow. Man. Let me tell you something about people like Jamil and that sort of gaggle of trendy lefties.
Gaggle, I like that.
Social justice warrior types. If you watch my channel, I talk a lot about the ideas pool that dominates our mainstream media and who our mainstream media journalists, for instance, look to for analysis and opinion. Inevitably, there is a crooked nexus that happens between the world of academia, formal academia, which is yoked in the language of the left, which is yoked in the language of cultural Marxism and postmodernity, and all the ideas that come with that, things like critical race theory and intersectionality and all that nonsense. You have a symbiotic and at times parasitic relationship between that ideas pool and the mainstream media, who by and large comes from those same universities and then want to espouse those same ideas in their workplaces, i.e. as journalists. So you never have a diversity of intellectual thought in the mainstream media, and therefore they look to the likes of Jamil, they look to the likes of Eusebius Makeza, they look to the likes of all these characters who basically feign and sham the language of being intellectually diverse, but really are not, if you were to sit them onto a spectrum. So debating someone like Jamil would be fantastic in terms of, me perhaps, leaving him in a pool of his own tears at the end of that talk, but it wouldn't really be beneficial to who I argue ordinary South Africans really are. And these are people who are desperate to actually hear the ideas from our side of the argument, if I can call it that. So yeah, I mean, I'll gladly debate him. But again, this is another thing about lefties, and I say this a lot on. I have a show called Blacks Only,
Yeah.
and I called it Blacks Only on purpose, to basically take the Mickey out of these race-obsessed
Yeah.
social justice warriors. Um, I invite lefties on the show quite a lot. I invite the race merchants, the sort of trendy lefty race merchants a lot on that show. But do they come on? No, they don't. Why? Because I've said this before. These guys do not know what they're talking about in most cases. And it takes you just giving them a dose of reality to juxtapose it to their ideas for them to realize all that shit they learned at universities it's a fugazi. It's nonsense.
Yeah.
It's absolute nonsense. It has no real world value to the average South African or any average citizen at all. And thus, they live in a little ivory tower. And the only person or the only people who give them an audience are the mainstream media. That's why they in and of themselves, have become an intellectual elite in this country, far removed from where ordinary South Africans are. Let me be precise and specific. Look at how someone like Eusebius, if any of you have the misfortune of listening still to the Eusebius Makeza show, you'll notice how Eusebius gets very confrontational with callers who basically gives an opinion based on the real world that conflicts with his postmodernist intersectionality, cultural Marxist nonsense, gets very angry at those people to the point where he's known to even shut down calls and to cut people short and to bully and harass people on those lines.
Yeah.
Why? Because it comes back to what I just explained. There is a sick relationship between the mainstream media in this country and the academic world, which is leftist in nature, and they basically jerk circle these ideas and don't test them in the real world. And it's only when they do come to contact with the real world, and those of us who are more on the ground, if you will, reflecting a lot more of the views, if you will, of the real world, if I can call it that loosely, that's when they get very nervous, because now they go, oh, yikes, how do I counter this guy? He's basically reflecting a type of a world that it is. And in a type of a world that it is, as I always say, that leftist nonsense they learn in universities doesn't reflect the daily lived reality of South Africans on the ground.
Yeah. Ronaldo Ronaldo says, I would donate 5,000 Rand to IRR if Big Daddy Liberty would debate Mighty Jamie. Make it happen.
Yo! Hey, man. And that's the thing about Mighty Jamie. There's very little mighty about him. And again, it comes back to these loud people on Twitter, but who are not very brave when they have to then test these ideas against opponents. And as I always say, not all that twitters is bold. And in most cases, the likes of Jamie et al., again, the race merchants, the trendy lefties, the people who have, they operate in a silo, basically, in a world where they don't debate each other, they don't question each other. It's all a jerk circle of this nonsense. Those individuals talk a big game around, we're the best debaters in the world. It's amazing how it's always the trendy lefties and the blabbity blacks who like to talk about, how they're fantastic debaters. I mean, Eusebius touts his debating skills often. I used to be a world champion debater. Jamie does the same thing. I'm this fantastic debater. Look at all my certificates and my trophies from Wits University. Blah, 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 blah. But when they're then pushed to debate people, there's all sorts of excuses. All sorts of excuses. Ronaldo is testament to that. He tried to set up a debate between Jamie and himself. Excuses and galore from Jamie. A chap named Herman Pretorius from the Institute of Race Relations, I can't think of his Twitter handle, tried to debate Jamie Mighty. And again, excuses from Jamie. And I've asked Jamie before, hey man, how about you come on to Blacks Only? Let's have the chat. Homie came up with all sorts of excuses of why he can't. No, I wanted to be in another territory and blah, blah, blah. Oh, what? Are you looking for emotional support? Dude, bring your intellectual ideas. That's all I care about. Yeah. I don't care about your damn feelings. Bring your intellectual ideas and let me beat you with the facts.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I've heard it, like you said, with Ronaldo. He's tried so many times to get these lefties on his show, and no one is willing to debate. And it's you know what really irritates me about, and I'm talking like a real like left, is that they're always saying things like, we got to fight for our freedoms. We need a right to choose. We need a right to do this. We need a right to do that. But the moment you say, okay, cool, you have your right to do whatever you want to do, but I'm going to do something else. I'm going to do it this way. Like, for example, let's say your right to choose for abortion, right? They're like, yeah, no, we need the right to abort. And then we're like, yeah, I'm not going to do that, though. I don't believe in that. That's fine. You can still do it, but I don't believe in it. And then they're like, no, you must. You must be for it. You have to be for it. They like shove it down your throat. And it's like, I feel like in the right world, if I can put it that way, and when I say right, I mean the right side of the right wing
Yeah, of the
world.
spectrum.
Yeah, that lefties can exist because we're like, do what you want to do, just don't expect
Yeah,
me to do it. But in
yeah,
their world, we can't exist,
yeah.
and therefore
Uh,
being hypocritical
You're right.
about free choice.
I mean, you're absolutely right, and that's the irony, the great irony, if you will, of those of us who truly stand for liberty and freedom,
Mm.
versus those who only sort of project the language of it, but not really the ideals
Mm.
of it in real terms. Um, Lefties are brilliant at that. And again, I must say this because it also happens on the right. A lot of people say, "Oh, so what are you saying that this kind of thing doesn't happen on the right?" No, it actually does.
Yeah.
And let me use America as a good example. You had a one Colin Kaepernick who used to be a quarterback for the I'm not sure. I could be getting the team wrong, but it's relevant. He was a famous quarterback in America, and what he began to do is, in protest of police brutality, in his words, he would take a knee during the singing of the national anthem
Oh
at
yes.
these games. Um,
What's
and
his name?
this blew the minds of a lot of people because, hey man, how dare you do this? Doesn't he know that in America we're proud patriots and blah 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 blah? Where was that coming from? Where was a lot of that coming from? It was coming from the right side of the argument, from Republicans, from conservatives. Suddenly, the idea of freedom, in this particular case, the freedom to express yourself freely, even in protest of something, became irrelevant.
Mm.
Suddenly, conformity to a certain ideal that they hold and want to impose on you became more important. So again, this kind of thing happens on the left and the right.
Yeah.
And that's why, as a classical liberal, I'm at an advantage to an extent of saying to both sides, hang on, how about both of you just look at freedom and liberty as the most important political value, and then take everything from there? Like start at that point, because you'll find that there's actually a lot of agreement on certain things,
Yeah.
but you don't see it because you're so invested in being in this camp versus that camp.
Yes.
And then sometimes you can be different shades of the same color
Yeah.
at times. So that's a distinct advantage. And so when I describe myself, for example, and when people say, "Oh, but you're on the right," I'm like, "Yeah." There's some people on the right who might disagree, especially when they start interrogating my ideas and they realize that actually I don't stand for the repressive things that happen on their side either. So it's food for thought, again, food for thought. But again, here's where it comes back to what you're actually raising. I've found generally that it is individuals who are on that right who are willing to have that conversation, who are willing to have that debate and disagreement. Those on the left avoid it for all they're worth.
Yeah, which is unbelievable, and they're amplified again, like you said, by the media. And then that thinks that well, they think, oh, well, I'm right because the media said so. Like,
Yeah.
okay, but you're not willing
It's a
to
false
have an
reality.
intellectual debate about it. But yeah, so. All right, so we're approaching the end of the show. We got about 7 minutes left. So I'm going to ask you one more question.
Sure.
And I think this will probably tie in with you ending off, because I do want you to give your final thoughts and a message to everybody that's watching. But
Sure.
on your channel, you've mentioned many times that you have a plan, that you're working on something.
Yes.
Would you care to elaborate? Are we allowed to know, or is this still in
Look,
development?
and again, as I said, I think one of the previous episodes, I think it was the last vlog I did. It's not like because I mean, I heard it the moment I said it. I sounded like the captain of the
Revolution is
A-Team,
coming. Yeah.
like amen. Guys, no, it's nothing. It's nothing grandiose and pompous as it maybe sounds. What it really is a very simple formula that I think would greatly aid the fight and the mission, if you will, for creating a liberty-orientated South Africa. In other words, building a broad coalition of South Africans from all walks who basically identify with liberty ideals. Now, I don't tell people who to vote for. That's not my place. It's not my job, and I don't do that. What I do is I sell them the ideas based on the notion that, hey, we already kind of agree on the values that make us who we are as South Africans. Now, if we agree on that, why are we allowing the politicians to divide us? How about we fight for certain ideas, i.e. liberty-oriented ideas that create the sort of society that allows for that diversity of who we are as a people, where there is diversity. So simply put, the plan, therefore, here's the broad stroke, and I'll debut it here on the Joe Emilio show, first time. Here's the broad idea. And of course, I'm working out the kinks, and it is South Africans who are beginning to support me, who are ever increasingly pushing me to the point where I can actually do it. But here it is in broad strokes. I currently live a life here in Johannesburg where I'm settled. I have a little flatlet. I'm not rich, people. Don't think I'm like Saul Kersner up in here or anything like that. But I have a relatively comfortable life here in South Africa, in Johannesburg. I'm settled and blah, blah, blah. But I look at what's happening around me in this country, and I realize that I can't live this comfortable life in good conscience, knowing that there are South Africans who are suffering. Very people, particularly, that I often say a lot that I care about. And you know, when you mention, for example, that I get very emotional in some of these videos, it's often when I'm talking about South African families. Nothing matters more to me than South African families. It is literally the very bedrock that we as individuals are socialized in. We're not tools or creations of the state. We are literally molded by the families that we're raised in. So it's very important for me that we get that element of society right. And when I see them being jerked around by politicians who don't care about them, I get incredibly angry, incredibly angry. As I said in Vlog 31, this registers to me on an emotional level, just as it does on an intellectual level. I'm a human, guys, I'm not a robot. So on that basis, the plan in its broad strokes is this. Over the next 6 months of my life, I'm basically going to sell all of my belongings to raise some extra money to be able to go around the country. And the plan is to produce, so there's two layers to it. There's the air war that I describe on my channel, and the air war is things like this. You know, we vlog, we're on YouTube. I'm ever increasingly traveling around the country talking to local radio stations and community radio stations for them to syndicate my show on their platform so that I reach those South Africans who don't have internet access, for example, who are the vast majority of South Africans. So in order to get these ideas out, I have to realistically be where the people are, so to speak. So I'm looking to syndicate my show on various radio stations across the country. I already have deals, rough deals, with about 3 of stations across the country. So I'm looking to grow that. Cool. Number one, so that's the air war that I think people, as they support and fund me, importantly on Patreon, that's where the money basically goes, in ensuring that the quality of that production is of a broadcast level, that I can walk into a radio station and say, yes, actually, I do meet your requirements because I've got this, this, and that. And thank you to the, I think, 133 patrons who are now on my Patreon and are donating. Guys, mwah, I super, super appreciate every single one of you. You are literally funding the war chest. You're on the Liberty bus, and you're helping me enact that air war that I talk about. Wherever increasingly I produce material, whether it's the videos, the podcasts, and the radio shows across the country. So it's definitely helping in that. But that's really about 30-40% of what I do. The rest, the 70 or 60% of what I do, is the actual work on the ground. The idea that you're in communities, people know you by name. They've shaken your hand because they know you. You've addressed their little Stokvel AGM. You've addressed their gemeenskapsaal, when they were having a community meeting. You've addressed a local traditional party in northern KZN, real story, where, you applied with Zulu beer until you're like, guys, hang on, I actually don't drink. And this shit's delicious though, bring me another cup. It's those South Africans who getting to them is my number one priority. And doing that requires real world costs. putting diesel in the bucky, having accommodation when I get somewhere, having a bit of funding to have someone who can maybe work the camera and do the editing work, so that I can actually focus on the advocacy work and the content in particular. So there's real world things that I'm considering when I, for example, ask people to support the BDL mission financially, to support it also in sharing the content, because that's equally important. It's not just about the money. That's equally important. The idea that people share the content and it reaches as many people as possible. So the plan, therefore, although it's not worked out in fine detail, and I don't have those details as yet, I'm working on it, so to speak, is to watch, excuse me, to watch South Africans begin to rally around the message, to watch South Africans begin to rally around my cause. And then not just to watch it, but to galvanize it, to literally say, guys, I get the energy, I get the gees, but this is what we need to do. Go out there, shake hands, go to rural communities, go into the informal settlements, do the honest groundwork, build that coalition of South Africans who then say, we met Big Daddy, we understand liberty and the ideas around it. We understand that you can have a society where the individual and families are more important than politicians, and that now we, empowered with these ideas, will look to the politicians to advocate for them, or we create those politicians ourselves. That's the vision. That's the power of what I'm looking to do. And the plan, if you will, in broad strokes of what I'm doing. But so in fine details in terms of where I'll be and who will work for me and all that, that's what I'm kind of working on. And that's what I mean when I say I'm working on a plan. And the beautiful part about it, and let me circle back to this as a final gasp, it's the encouragement to be unrelenting. It's the encouragement to be dogmatic. It's the encouragement to be a zealot. It's the encouragement to literally march through the institutions of society, of the state, and of government in order to change them, which is literally firing me up. When someone literally drops me a tiny message and says, BDL, I'm a pensioner, homie, I don't have much, but here is $1. Here is $1 a month that will get you on the road to build the sort of society that I can pass on to my grandchildren. That right there, I don't think you understand how that makes me feel. It's literally like tying, hey man, like Wile E. Coyote, and tying that TNT rocket on my back and launching me into the atmosphere. I feel charged up. It is that South African who I am keen on devoting the next 6 months of my life, and even more if needs be, and if the resources allow, into serving that South African, into fighting for them and the battle of ideas, to build that prosperous, free, non-racial, and property-owning society. A society where we, the God-fearing, law-abiding, and of course, the family-oriented South Africans, get to enjoy this country, and not the politicians.
Yeah. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, please go follow Sihle on everything: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Once again, I'll leave the links in the description after the show. Fascinating and exciting times as well. Let me be the first. I don't know if I would be the first, but if you need a video editor, you got my email. Let me know.
Hey man, shout out to you, dog. I've seen your editing work. I actually said as much in an email I sent you. Like, hey, this is brilliant.
Yeah.
And I said this because I know what it is to edit, and it's very difficult. I do everything myself at the moment. I do have an assistant at times who helps me. Shout out to the Institute of Race Relations for supporting me, because that's the other partner I have in my mission. The Institute of Race Relations have literally been an absolute blessing to what I do. They're led by Dr. France Crenier. They literally saw what I do, and they were like, hey man, we buy into the vision, we see what you're doing. You have us as an institution that backs you, that supports you. So I also encourage those of you who maybe watch this, and shout out to every single one of you who did watch, to support the Institute of Race Relations. They are literally in the battle of ideas, and it's their support that has seen me get to where I am right now, in terms of being able to do some of the work that I do, but it does still need you guys to support the work that we do. So shout out to every single one of you. Support the IRR, support Big Daddy Liberty, find me on Patreon, and throw $1 towards your favorite fat boy, and you'll see me in your part of the woods very soon.
Absolutely. All right. Before we go, very quickly, because this has been brought up again, and I told you before we went on air that there was one question I had to ask you. So,
Oh, there it is. Here comes that deep water.
Big Daddy, please start a political party. I told you, people are asking, man, is that ever going to be a thing? Would you ever run for president?
Guys, full disclosure, I come from a background in party politics. I cut my teeth in the Democratic Alliance unwittingly. I wasn't really the sort of person who wanted to go into politics. But it's a long story. I'll tell you the story of how I even ended up into that in another vlog.
Yeah.
You know, I cut my teeth in the DA, and it was there where I also realized how sickening party politics is and how utterly useless it can really be. When you have a situation where it is populists who win the rat race of being the loudest voices in those parties, as opposed to those who actually hold ideas and want to sell ideas and a vision of a society to people. It's the populists who often win, and I can't deal with that, because populists, unfortunately, lies are their strongest tools. Fibbing and misleading South Africans, misleading the very people that I tell you I care about, South African families, is their bread and butter. Because remember, for a politician, their singular focus is the acquisition and the retention of power at all costs. Service delivery, the battle of ideas, that's all incidental. It's secondary and incidental, if anything. But for them, it's about the acquisition and retention of power. And I don't think I have that character in me. I don't have the personality to lie to people, to look someone square in the face and say, hey, do you know that 1 + 1 = 4? And then you're not going to vote because it equals 4? Like, I don't have that ability. Like, it'll break my heart to walk away from someone that I know that I just lied to. So
I'm going to stop you. Sorry, I got to stop you there, because that's not what people are asking for, though. There's a lot of people that just want you to be honest. The people are crying for it. They want you to be honest. When they watch your video, they love the passion, they love the honesty. That's what they want. So you would have, I think, a voter base that would absolutely support you. I'll send you the screenshots if you want. I have them on my Facebook page of people saying, this is the man. This is the man that needs to be in power. This is the man that needs to be president. And it's all because of the passion that you're talking about. So when you say, oh, I don't have the heart to lie, people don't want you to lie.
Look, I think, maybe to be direct, I think my biggest fear is that I feel as though my mission is far greater than that. I feel as though there has to be some people who pave the way for something. There has to be some people who take the arrows and who take the attacks, who take the abuse, in order to pave the way for those who can do a better job at something. If you like me, and if you think I'm someone who is of leadership material, wait till you see the people that I think will arise from the wake of what I'm doing. Wait until you see those people. They may blow your mind. You might have a young chap out of Khayelitsha who lives in a sand dune, in a shack in a sand dune in Cape Town, literally listening to my message and saying, I remembered when, our favorite fat boy came to our informal settlement and he spoke to us about these ideals. And I was shaped by those ideas. I am the politician in his case that he is because of them. Can you imagine how fantastic those individuals may be? And again, I'm not saying, and I totally get you, and I think you're right. There were people who literally look at me and say, oh, but maybe you need to do this. But I don't think that's my place right now. I think my place is to be the guy who plows the ground, who turns the soil and lays the seed, and then has
a path for future.
Absolutely, and has the patience to water it consistently, doing the groundwork in order to see those fruits come out of the ground. I think that's what God has placed me on this planet to do. I think that is when I die and I stand before Hashem for judgment, and he says to me, tell me what you did with the life that I gave you. I can say 3 things to my God. Hashem, thank you. You gave me life. I told your people stories and I shared them with other people. You gave me that voice to do that. You gave me this mind and the gift of the gab, if you will, to allow me to do exactly that. Hashem, thank you very much. You gave me the ability to be honest to the people that I love. And I love your people, Hashem, in all their different shades, in all their different guises, and all the families that you've created and placed on this earth. I observed mitzvot to literally look after my fellow man. And Hashem, more importantly, I created an environment that allowed for millions more of your people to live a fruitful and fantastic life on your planet. Those are the three things that I want to be able to tell Hashem that I did. And to do that, I think, in the here and now, and I can't see the future. I don't know what will happen in the future. But in the here and now, as I said, in the next 6 months of my life, that will be my mission, to literally reach as many South Africans as I can, to produce quality content that educates and advocates for ideas, and to literally be able to say at one stage that I worked my damnedest to build, or rather to share my values of faith, flag, and the family, and to share the ideas, to advocate for the ideas of liberty and classical liberalism. That's who I am in a nutshell. And I think in lieu of the question about being president, that's what I think is the mission for me in the here and now.
Hey man, I can't knock you for it because either way, you're doing amazing work, and I'm a huge fan, as I said. And like I said, my
Thanks,
way
man.
of helping is what I do, what the videos I do for you, and also like again, if you need a video editor, I'm here. You have my email, you have my phone number. I'm a shout away. Really, I'll be
I was about
willing
to
to help
say,
you no matter
homie,
what.
I'm going to be in Cape Town as of July. So we'll definitely meet and we'll have a chat.
Oh, fantastic. Would love that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I've taken up enough of Big Daddy Liberty's time. We were supposed to only do an hour, but thank you, Big Daddy, once again for coming onto my show. I hope you'll come back. There's so many more
Absolutely.
questions that I would love to ask you, and we can maybe debate on a few things. Well, you and I have the same views, but
Sure.
we'll
Sure. Why not?
encourage people
Why
to
not?
ask questions and answer them. So I would love to have you back if you're willing. And if you can, hang on the line while I sign off and we'll give each other a proper goodbye. But if you have to go, that's also fine. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Big Daddy Liberty. Again, I'm going to put all his details in the description below. I'm also going to leave a link to, he mentioned The People's War. There is an interesting documentary that has been released by Afriform, which is basically based on that book. So if you want to go watch that, I'll leave that also in the link below, and I'll leave a link to IRR as well. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Ronaldo, for telling people to come check this out. Please, ladies and gentlemen, if you liked what you saw, give it a like. Subscribe to my channel. I'm definitely going to be doing a lot more interviews with other interesting people. I'm trying to get Jack from the Cape Independence Party, I think it's called. I would love to chat with him. I've messaged him, but we'll see. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, I have a lot of other content on my channel, comedy, stand-up, skits, and other interviews with comedians as well as interesting people. So please subscribe, and I'll catch you at the next one. Thank you, and good night.